I consider myself now as an ecological engineer. More and more I've found that we don't have water problems and ecological problems. We have people problems. Knowledge-wise, you can know all you want to know about hydrology or ecology or biology, but if you're not getting to the core of people and how they think and how they relate to each other, the rest of that knowledge almost doesn't matter.
Welcome to the Mindform podcast, where we delve into the minds of some of the most interesting people on the planet, discuss psychology, philosophy, and personal growth, and share the wisdom we uncover with you. Join us as we explore the art of forming our minds. Here's your host, Frank Lawton.
Kia ora from New Zealand. Welcome to the Mindform podcast. My name is Frank Lawton. I'm a father, husband, and contemplator with a passion for ways of operating which better empower us to live wholeheartedly. The Mindform podcast is an extension of the Mindform platform and is similarly a space dedicated to exploring and altering psychological landscapes together. In each weekly episode, I'll spark a conversation to mine for gems of wisdom and collaborate on the game of architecting our minds. Most of our guests are members of the Mindform platform. We're all big nerds for psychology, philosophy, and self-improvement. This week's guest is John Warinner. Hey, John. John is a founding member of Mindform and a leader in the community. He manages our weekly video chats called Upwelling. He's leading us on a month of learning about regenerative systems and has co-led a month-long study of The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle with me. I know John as a mentor and grandfather figure, a musician and a poet, a hopeful lover of life, and a voice for better systems in his work in environmental management. I'm excited to see where this goes, what principles, tools, and systems are at work in this personable mind. Thanks heaps for joining me, John. I think can I just check your audio? I didn't hear you. Oh, no, there you are. Yep, I can hear you. Very good. Yeah, great. So how are you? What have been your sort of main feelings today, John? How are you doing?
It's a good day. I got off to a good start, and kind of like rolling into the Thanksgiving holidays here in the U.S.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I'm working today, but you're starting to kind of feel that. I
feeling, yeah.
tutor a few kids in school, like math, mostly math, and they've canceled their appointments today and tomorrow because of the holiday, and so you're just kind of feeling that front end of the holiday week. But yeah, it's awesome. Nice festive time of year.
Great, man. Great. Yeah, I'm thinking of doing that actually. Bit of tutoring, easy, fun, rewarding. But anyway, let's get into it. I did have a question actually that I'd love to kick off with. So you've been running this month on regenerative cultures, building regenerative. That's a hard word for me. Cultures. And you do a bit of work, or at least you try to lean in that direction with your work with like water management and stuff. And I suppose something that has interested me is, what is the intersection for you between your work and your interest in self-improvement and psychology and philosophy, and then this sort of, in a sense, more practical collective work of building regenerative systems? What's the intersection there for you?
That's not on your list of questions that I prepared for, but
what? I thought it was.
It might be further down than what I got to. So I think the best way for me to answer that is I've been a engineer for 36 years, 37 years. And my degrees were in agricultural and civil engineering, but I consider myself now, after a lifelong education, as an ecological engineer. And progressively, but starting way back, but progressively over the years, I've found that engineering, I still love engineering. I like the business of problem solving. But more and more I've found that we don't have water problems and ecological problems. We have people problems. You can knowledge-wise, you can know all you want to know about hydrology or ecology or biology, like whatever. But if you're not getting to the core of people and how they think and how they relate to each other, the rest of that knowledge almost doesn't matter. And
Mm.
so progressively over my 30 some year career, I've just kind of like brought, the social sciences and the philosophy, psychology, sociology, that's the underpinnings of Mindform. That's just kind of been, like just progressively and pretty continuously just becoming kind of almost more of what I'm focused on than the other stuff. I'm just super intrigued by it and drawn to it. But also, for me, they're 100% totally interlaced. I don't see them really as separate at this point at all.
Do you has your roles within that world changed alongside that? Like, as in moving from, say, you know, being an on the floor engineer to working with teams or managing or maybe being a representative out in the community or something like that?
Yeah. So one of the pieces of wisdom or guidance I was given at a pretty young age is my grandfather, my mom's dad, was a chemist, and he actually was one of the chemists that went out on site when the Hindenburg exploded, and he
Wow.
was part of the team that like looked into that. Dates him a little bit, but his advice was to learn a science and then learn the business end of that science. That was kind of like his one sentence career advice to me.
Hmm.
And so coming out of the gate as a young engineer, I was following that advice or directive, and I tried to build a firm or a team as kind of my core focus. And I don't know, I found that was a very challenging thing to do, especially as a young engineer, because in the engineering world, people like to hire gray-haired engineers, and at that time I was not a gray-haired engineer, and they want somebody, that's, if they're going to hire you to do project X, they want to hire someone that's done 20 project X's, right?
Right.
And so to try to be a young up and coming philosophical engineer, but also trying to build a team, I don't know, I almost kind of feel like I went at it backwards and I tried to do everything too soon. And so I wasn't successful in building a firm. And it was kind of like I found more success in building a knowledge based practice, which is a little bit, kind of like a little weird for me because I've always really enjoyed teams, especially like multidisciplinary teams. Um, I always enjoyed being on a team more than I enjoyed, being solo. But I found the kind of, I don't know, like I was able to survive solo, ultimately, where I wasn't able to kind of survive as a business leader, like a corporate creator business leader. I kind of didn't figure out how to do that and pursue all the curiosities and stuff that I wanted to pursue along the way.
You initially you wanted to go right into having a team
Yeah.
and yeah, having a team, and you ended up not managing that early in your career and working. You said knowledge based practice. Was that time in your knowledge based practice an opportunity for you to develop skills around self improvement and working with
Oh
other
yeah.
people that enabled you to work in a team like that?
Yeah, I think it's one of the greatest burdens that I appreciate that most people probably feel, especially people like there's other people on Mindform, that you talk to them and it's clear that they're in kind of team leadership and
Mm-hmm.
management positions and stuff.
Yes.
And to serve that role in life or in business on top of serving that role like in your family, like being a provider and supporter of your family, being a provider and leader of a team. It's difficult in that with all those types of responsibilities, it's difficult to find the additional time and bandwidth for exploration. And it's something I
Right.
really like empathize, with people because I personally I'm just like a really like curious creative person, like when I do my virtues in action character profile stuff, the stuff that comes back is like you're curious, you're creative, you enjoy humor, but love of learning is up there.
Mm.
And so I think for people, so that's the lens through which I see the world, right? And I've been around enough to realize not everybody is cut from that same cloth, right? Like there's some, particularly in the engineering world, there are plenty of people that aren't terribly curious people,
Yeah.
They're much more comfortable than I am at just, following procedures and putting square pegs in square holes and things like that. And but anyway, I by kind of like choosing the path less traveled, which is what I've kind of typically done through most of my life. The downside was just never really fitting in to the corporate, ladder climbing model. But the definite upside was it provided me that room to explore and experiment and test theories and things that I just think a lot of people don't end up getting the opportunity to do that. So
Yeah, it's almost a sad irony because, I mean, collectively we need the people with more responsibilities, with more impact, with more power, with more leadership. They're the people we most need to be doing that work. And if our systems were structured ideally, the people who have done or who are doing that work would always be the people who are in leadership. Although, of course, unfortunately,
yeah.
statistics show that's not the case. Traits like narcissism and sociopathy and stuff are much more highly represented in leadership places. But and perhaps that's
Well,
part
if
of
I can
why.
jump in
Yeah,
there, I
yeah,
think
go.
what some people do much better than I did, which they do right, if you want to call it right,
Mm,
is let's say like a Steve Jobs or some, and I don't know if he's the greatest example of this, but like Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, whatever, those of them that are predominantly like creatives and innovators, the ones that have really like make things work, I think they find somebody earlier in their career that they align with and partner with, that they recognize that's the role they belong in. And so
mm,
they don't try to play the operations manager,
yeah.
CEO role. They just put them in charge of the innovation role or whatever. And I think if I'd have happened, to team up with three or four other guys, all of whom were reasonably well, like we had, access to the financial capital that we needed to grow the business and stuff like that. I think all that could have worked, right? Like I could have done it in a team environment where I was off on the side in that type of a role. But to try to play that role while also being the one like holding everything
Yeah.
together, and it's very hard. Bootstrapping is very, very hard. I think it gets talked about like, oh, I'm bootstrapping this and I'm bootstrapping that, and like there's almost a glamour or something with it, but like on the day-to-day real world part of it, it's very, very hard. It's hard.
Yeah, well, it is worth remembering that the entire point of that phrase "pull yourself up by your bootstraps" is that it's impossible. I mean, that is initially
It's a great point.
that's the meaning of the phrase. But
I could have benefited from you telling me that when I was 26.
perhaps, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess that speaking that does speak to, or what you've just spoken to is the importance of teams in that, right? Like you can't have leaders who are able to grow as individuals, explore other options if they're spending all of their time, however you want to phrase it, but whether it's micromanaging everything or just being in charge of all these various responsibilities, constantly having to meet deadlines, appease the quarterly goals of shareholders, whatever it is. Like if you're constantly just in that reaction mode as a leader, then you don't have the opportunity to become a real leader, a good leader. And yeah, teamwork, I suppose, speaks to that a lot. And is that a theme? Because I haven't been reading the book, as I let you know, this month yet. But is that a theme that comes up around regenerative systems, or regenerative cultures? Because there's a lot of talk about sort of these prevailing assumptions that are more extractive in our systems as we have them now around environmental management or around democracy or whatever. There are principles that come up in more regenerative systems like holistic or following the cycles as they already are. Is non-individualism or collaboration something that comes up a lot in terms of being able to build better social systems?
I would say absolutely yes. I don't know if in this book it gets framed exactly that way, but I
Hmm.
think some of the ways that it shows up in the stuff I'm currently like reading and thinking about, as we speak, I'm pretty immersed in an initiative with a guy that I met through another online community, where we're looking at, let's say, governance and democracy, right? And we're talking about, let's say, designing democracy, or looking at governance from a design
I find this
perspective.
stuff so interesting. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, and so we've both have had the experience of, because bringing this back to effective teams, right? Like, so much of it is, if everybody is on a team is going to flourish, like, that team has to be constructed and stewarded for that, right? Like,
Hmm.
for with that intention and that commitment, that the intention of this team is for each member of this team to flourish, right?
Right.
And then like, if you kind of project that outwards from the team to the community scale, I still believe, like, at the absolute core is individuals flourishing, right? Like, you have to,
Hmm.
for a community to flourish, that's not like separate and different from an individual flourishing. It's a whole bunch of individuals flourishing, right?
Right.
But I think the key when you step from the individual to the team to the community is that, I'm jumping around a little bit, but going back to like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So when Maslow's stuff first came out, like the first book, let's say, it's what you commonly see in the, like, portrayed in the pyramid and all that, with self-actualization on top. And my understanding is that then Maslow came back later and said, well, that really isn't the top of the hierarchy. That the next step from there is self-transcendence, right? Like, everything we've talked about so far is the self, but like, the reality is selves can't, there is no such thing as a self, right?
Right.
or,
Yeah. Yeah.
or like,
It's boundaried. It's inherently a limited
in
frame of
in
reference. Yeah.
nature, yeah, nobody's separate from anyone else, and particularly in governance, right? Because, like, we all use the same roads and we all use the same infrastructure,
I
and
mean, yeah.
so like, I'm if you're not okay, I'm not okay. And like, if you're really not okay, I'm only going to get so okay, right? Because you're not okay. And so I think it's just a super important. Paul LaFontaine, who used to be a Mindform member, is the one that actually said it in the way that like hit hardest with me, when he was working on his concept for the eudaimonia game. And at
Mm.
the very start of that, he said he had this kind of like little, almost uh, like uh, guided meditation type tone, and he's leading us through the entry to this game. But he says, picture the tribes to which you belong, or the teams
Yes.
to which you belong. And then he said this really pregnant phrase for me. He said, now think of the teams that you're on, or tribes you're on, that are committed to all members flourishing. And I just, like, personally, it's like I ran into a brick wall. I was like, wait, what? And it was like, and for him, he just kind of presented it. He didn't make a big deal of it or whatever, but it was super profound for me, because I was like, quite honestly, I'm not sure that I'm on any teams that are committed to all members flourishing. And he went on with the game, and I just spiraled off, like I was in my own Idaho, because I'm like, no, wait a minute, like, this is
I
a
remember us
this is an
talking about
important
this.
thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is
Yeah.
this is super profound. And so almost ever since, I've kind of been on this, a little bit locked in on this notion of, in other settings, I've introduced myself as a person that's trying to do that now, right? Trying to design teams on which
That's your
that all
new.
members are
That's your
flourishing.
bio, isn't it, on Mindful now as well?
Somewhere, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I
right?
believe
Because I
so.
just got kind of transfixed with it.
Yeah.
And the more I thought about it, I felt like, if we are not doing that, what are we doing? Right. And it just became so fundamental to me, and yeah, just really amazing. how that stuff works.
I
I
think
hope that
it's,
answered your question.
well, I don't really remember my question, but it doesn't matter. I'm interested in what we're talking about right now at this moment. So,
Yeah.
um, I, I'm really charmed, and yeah, I'm really charmed by that. It just shows that you don't know what you're doing is going to impact people and how it's going to impact people. I mean, who knows how long Paul thought about that little component of his thing that he just moved on from,
Yeah.
and that's something that stirs within you. I mean, that just shows the value of, you have something to speak on, you have a principle you think is important, just share it out there, because there might be one person that resonates with, and it just
Yeah.
has a real impact. Ryan just asked in the chat, and I was thinking about this as well. Would you say Mindform is a community in which everyone is dedicated to each other's flourishing?
No, I personally wouldn't. That's not to say that there's almost like a subculture that's
Mm.
unstatedly
Yeah.
behaving that way. And maybe I'm being overly kind of specific or something about it. But what I'm talking about is a community, and this isn't what Paul said, right? Like this is where I've taken it in my own
Yeah, sure.
mind. But like the intentionality and the focus is where I've kind of gone with it, is particularly committed to all members flourishing, like kind of above and beyond everything else, right? And I'm not, yeah, it's dangerous for me to. I'm just being super honest. I'm not saying like that Mindform isn't contributing to that notion in any way or something. That's not at all what I'm saying, because obviously Mindform incubated, this core idea that kind of like changed, in some respects, a trajectory, or defined a trajectory of my life. But I think the well, first of all, I think there's quite a few people that participate in Mindform that I haven't even crossed paths with, right?
Yeah,
Like, and so
many.
this is where I'm coming very earnestly and saying, I mean, I don't want to start naming names, but there's people like, so I host the Upwelling weekly gatherings, right? And there's certain people that come almost every time to that, right? And so I feel like I can personally, genuinely say that I feel like I'm playing an active role in the flourishing of person X, person Y, person Z. But just knowing that there have been many other people that have come and gone, and that are even still in Mindform, that and like, I'm personalizing this, but it's like I know
Mm.
that I didn't engage with them and find out, like how I could help them flourish. You know what I
Right.
mean?
So,
So it's like,
yeah.
so that's the only reason I say no, is I just don't know that it's got that intention.
So
Um,
your ideal, right? I'm just trying to help articulate or understand your ideal of a community dedicated to, or a community dedicated to everyone flourishing, or everyone within the
Yeah, the
community
way the
flourishing. You
way
have a way
Paul
of
said it
phrasing
was
it.
something
Yeah.
like, in which all members are committed to all members flourishing,
Oh, yeah. That's
right?
a great way
Like,
to
and so
articulate it.
so
Yeah.
it seems like there's a certain orientation
Mm.
to that, right? Like, where if that were present, you'd know that was present, right? Like, because it's so clear, and it's so clearly the intention, that it's
Mm.
not some kind of like byproduct or something. It's like the actual intention of the community.
Oh yeah, I mean it does. Yeah,
Does
Ryan
that make
says it's a
sense?
high standard. Yeah, yeah. Ryan says in the chat it's a high standard, and I
Oh
think
yeah. Oh
I
yeah.
agree. And you're trying to, when you, I mean that sounds like that something that's entirely that. Every member is fully dedicated to every member's flourishing. It's the kind of thing where when you imagine it, you imagine it feeling like a whole other world. Like you imagine it feeling really powerful, really transformational by its very existence. A community like that, like, yeah, because what I think, one thing that would take, and I'd be interested to know what you think some attributes are of a community like this, but one thing that would require, in my mind, is a degree of genuine connection, or at least strong desire for connection or empathy between every member of the group, right? Which potentially would limit the size of any group like that. But in order for me to be dedicated to whichever other members flourishing, there has to be a sense which that person's life has personal meaning to me, right?
Yeah, and I want to be clear. I mean, I totally am glad Ryan asked that question, and I hope everyone's fine with me just answering honestly as I
Of
see it,
course,
right?
please
But
do.
but like a couple really important caveats is like I'm answering how I see it, right? Like Ryan might
Mm-hmm.
answer that question completely differently because he's in a different relationship with this community than I am, right? And he has an actual role in declaring what this community's purpose is. I don't, right? And so, and then the other part of it is back to the follow-up statement about it being a high bar. I want to be crystal clear that this isn't a like this is I'm not bringing this like as a judgment or a lens to put on other communities, right? Like say, oh, well, you're not this and therefore, I mean, it's not a
Yeah, yeah.
judgment lens.
It's just an ideal to,
It's
yeah,
an idea, right?
yeah,
and
yeah.
and and if you press me further, and I think I already said this, but I want to be clear about it. If you press me clear further and said, in your life, John, point at a tribe that you know of, that preferably that you belong to, but that this is what that tribe is, and that's my whole point. Like, I don't know of one.
Mm, mm,
But I, like, from the stories you've told me, Frank, about you and your relationship with the people in your church, for example, if you told me, well, I belong to one, it's the such and such, church that I'm a member in, it's like I'd be like, that's phenomenal. I'm glad that that's what, you know what I mean, that I have no knowledge of whether that's what that church is about, but it seems to me like if there was an organization on the planet that fit this bill, it would probably be something like that, like a spiritually based organization, right? Because
mm.
that it just seems like common sense to me, or whatever, that they're most likely to be aligned this way.
Why?
Whereas, what's that?
Why? Why do you
That's a
think that it
that's a
would be,
that's
yeah,
a great
spiritual?
question. I don't know. I don't know for sure why. I haven't sat and thought about that. Well, I'll just say, like, um, I guess why I'm saying that is from my personal experience. I wasn't raised in a religious, like, go to church family, okay? But when my wife and I started having children and started raising them, we agreed with each other that we thought it would be helpful or good, right? To incorporate that type of experience or whatever in
Mm,
our lives, right? A culture of that type of a culture. And I can tell you, like, in the particular church we joined, and we were in there for, I don't know, 3 to 5 years. It never became that for me, right? Like, it never became evident to me that that's what that particular church was, at its core. But I'm just saying that, like, I guess I'm saying what I'm saying because about it being like that it would be most likely some sort of a spiritually based community is I don't know how you would end up having a tribe where all members are committed to each member flourishing without there being some sort of a spiritual element to it, right? Like, that doesn't mean it would have to be a spiritually based community, but I'm just saying it seems like it would improve the likelihood, but I don't know.
yeah, I mean, I have the same intuition, but I don't
Yeah.
know why. I don't know why I have that
Yeah.
intuition.
I'd be the first to admit that it's an ideal also. So I don't like, I'm not walking around, like, yeah, I want to be really clear. I'm not walking around using it like as a judgment or a measuring
Mm,
stick or something. It's like, it's a paradigm I'm now working with, that it's like I'm seeing the world through that
yeah.
lens, right? So,
Yeah, it's not a lens I've looked at things through, but now that you've presented it to me and I plonk it on, it's like I think yeah, you've articulated something that's really important to me as well. Like when um like what I'm trying to do in Mindform with this podcast and other little things, and the role that I have in my church community as well, or that I try to have, is really, yeah, it's trying to move us closer to that ideal. Like I enter a community, I see a community that has stated ideals and has, yeah, and it's a collection of people with shared values, shared beliefs, who has these structured activities together in these systems, And what I try to create more of is, well, it's that. I mean, maybe I can't articulate it any better. Like every member being committed to each member's flourishing. In my church, what that looks like is I think we have a lot of members who are really committed to each other, but I'm trying to increase the degree to which that's like people are consciously thinking about their own and each other's degree of flourishing in their life, and they're doing active things to close that gap, right? Whether it's doing spiritual practices, it's going out and doing spiritual activities together, it's spending active time in each other's lives and homes, but trying to like make that a proactive thing of, okay, cool, we're all here together, we all love each other, we all believe in this stuff. Now, how can we practice supporting each other's flourishing? And then in the community of Mindform, it's sort of the opposite. We have a lot of individuals who are committed to their own flourishing and who are doing active work around that. And my question is, how can we connect people more and trigger that kind of that sense of community and that sense of us all being a part of this and important to each other, and both of
Yeah,
those sides are necessary, right?
I wanna jump in and comment on that because I also know this is a subject that Ryan himself has both, Socratically posed the question, but also offered his perspectives on. So, like, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but at my end, what I feel like he has said more than once is that, he's made the argument that self-interest and altruism aren't like separate things, right? Like that they're almost like two sides of the
Yeah,
of the same coin,
I've made
right?
I've made that argument too. Yeah.
Yeah, and so what I've kind of been thinking a lot about that and kind of building on it because I agree, right? Like I don't think I number one, I don't agree that they're separate things, and number two, I don't know that it's worth much time because I'm so secure in the idea that they're not separate things. I don't think it's worth much to me to like try to pick it apart and
Mm.
even explain why or something. But I've gone to a more practical realm, which is okay. Well, then, because like in my work, like this is totally operative, right? Like where you live in a world where, like you just described, Frank, people operate out of self-interest. It's human nature. It's built in, right? It's our responsibility to ourselves to do that, right? And so what I've been working with lately is this idea that, well, then if that's the functional core operating system, then
Yeah,
how do
that's a
you get
given.
people
Yeah.
to do this other thing, right? Like, which is to be members of a community in which all members are flourishing. And I haven't like 100% worked this out, but like the conceptual model I'm working with is picture for a second that, like, okay, so I'm zeroing in here on the whole, like what we do, right? Like Aristotle's, you are what you repeatedly do, right? Like we can sit and think about things, but when we go out in the world, it's what we do that really manifests who we are, right?
Mm.
And so we're perceiving, we're making sense of things, and then we're acting, right? And in this continuous loop, we're perceiving, cognition, action, perception, cognition, action, and all toward something, right? Well, all toward some desired outcomes or intentions or whatever, right? And so what I'm thinking is, what if you start with a circle that's like all the things that are in your self-interest, and it's just like just accept. And I don't think it's even giving people permission. It's already built in. It's inherent that people are going to do what's in their self-interest or be oriented toward doing what's in their self-interest. So the first circle is all the things that you could do next in this next moment that are in your self-interest. And then, like, instead of working outward from there and saying, okay, now what's all the things I could do that would be beneficial to
Yeah,
someone
yeah,
else,
yeah.
and then find
No,
where
it's
those
digging
Venn
in.
diagrams
Yeah.
overlap, rather than that, just say, okay, now within this domain of things that, and I mean, this is getting like really like conscious about, like, people don't, you're not like, this is something of habits that would have to get built in, right? Like over time. But like the next circle in is like your partner, the closest person to you in your life, right? And it's like your wife, and if you want to lump your child in there because he's like a tiny, tiny young child, but whatever, the next closest person to you is another circle of like within what's what's the most valuable thing that you could do next that would be um, of value to them, right? And if you're doing something of value to your partner, you're doing something of value to yourself, right? And so now this circle is starting to close. You got the big circle of everything I could do in my own self-interest. The next concentric or whatever circle inside there is the subdomain of that, which would also be in my wife's best interest. And then what's the circle inside that would be in my family member's best interest, right? And then you just keep telescoping in, like, and then what would be the things I could do that would also be in the community, in the best interest of the tribe I'm in, or the community I'm in. And then ultimately the last one is, I don't know if it's the last one, but where I'm at is, and then within that domain, what's the thing I could do that would also be in the benefit of the planet, right? Like the ecosystem that supports me or supports us or whatever. And I feel like that's kind of an answer to the question of a way that you could go at it, kind of cognitively, and like just get away from this whole issue of whether altruistic behavior is or isn't in my own interest, and just find the things that are in your own interest.
And everyone
Embrace
else's.
that you're going to do things in your own interest, but find the things that are also in these other interests. And if we could encourage, whatever, facilitate, catalyze people working on those things, then all of a sudden we're serving ourselves, but we're also serving all these other,
Yeah,
like the self-transcendence
I'm
part,
going to
right?
present that visually because I sketched it while you were talking, and
Yeah.
Brandy commented, "Oh, personal orbits, circles that go out from us that people inhabit in our lives." No, this is different. This is the
This is the
opposite, Brandy.
opposite.
So
Yeah.
you start
Right.
with this is everything you can do, and then this is the things you can do which help you, and then this is the things within that category that also help your family, and then the tiny little dot is things you can do within
Yeah.
all of those categories that also help the world. What I love about that is, for me, each time I ask that question, because I was just doing that for myself while you were talking, it crystallizes something. Like there's a vague sense, and it gets more and more refined. Um, and what that is to me is something that's very hard to articulate, but it's something like just leaning in, like full thrust, face first, whatever, into the things that inspire me most, my highest values and ideals, my picture of a great life and goodness, and just enthusiastically and sort of face forward, like forthrightly, just leaning into that with courage and without withhold. Like that's the category, because there are things that serve myself immediately in the short term, which don't serve that ideal, and there are things that serve myself and my partner in the long term that don't serve that ideal. But as I go broader and broader, like in terms of the people that I'm considering, or the parts of myself, right? Because I think an inherent part of why this works is that everything that we're narrowing in on in terms of the wider society, and then the world, and then the future of the world, that they're all things that it's a system that we're a part of, right? They're things we can't be unaffected by. But as I consider all of these things, that sort of becomes the only option. Just in a very quick, not deep version of that exercise, that becomes the only option for me. But that's always been something, and I think I might have talked to Vin about this in the last call, I don't recall, but talked to someone about it recently. But that's something that I come back to, is like, no matter what is going on, uh, no matter what you encounter that you're trying to react to, that you're trying to respond to in the best way, it seems like that one thing is always the best response. Whether you're trying to honor someone, whether you're trying to feel good, whether you're trying to achieve something, whether you're trying to pull the finger at someone who's doubted you, whether you're trying to respond to injustices, I always feel like that is an answer that works in any of those contexts. Just what is my highest ideal? What do I absolutely love? What do I hope for? And then just going really ham on that. Yeah, but I want to get into this interplay between a little bit more, which is, I guess, where we really started this conversation, this interplay between self-serving and self-improvement, and then systems that work for everyone. And, we've talked about, of course, how to use what different ways you could structure a system or a community that encourages individual flourishing and encourages us to support each other. But another, I guess, question around that. Well, here, I'll start by saying this. I was listening to a podcast a couple of weeks ago. I wish I could remember the name of the podcast. I'll definitely tag it or something when I'm done here. But they talk a lot about systems thinking and complex systems. And one of the key ideas that an interview, a guest on the podcast, was bringing up was that a core characteristic of an effective complex system is a system where each node, right, each individual in the system has an empowered and improved capacity to operate constructively with other nodes. But that requires individual growth, and it requires focus on supporting those individuals. So, for example, like if we want a better society, you need to reach a certain threshold of people individual people who, in their own way of operating, are empathetic, are thinking about the bigger picture, have a capacity to relate effectively with others, have a capacity to learn and grow and change, and function effectively. Like that, individuals doing that is inherent for a system at large. Have you, like, in your work, and I know you also do, you do a bit of like coaching and mentoring with young people, you're on Mindform, and you're in these environmental management systems. Well, how have you seen those two things interplay in the communities that you've been in, that where they're not at that ideal of everyone being committed to each member's flourishing, um, but where you're considering that ideal? How have you seen that interplay between personal growth and effective systems? That's my question.
Yeah. So where I want to go, I hope it's respectful to your question, because
That's fine.
I don't want to just ignore your question. But one of the things, something's just connecting for me, going back to Ryan's question about the way I think you said the question was raised is Mindform like constructed as, or whatever, like a community in which all members are flourishing? And my answer to that was no. But an important rest of the answer is, I do think Mindform is contributing to this other worldview or whatever that we're talking about, right? Because, and it goes back to what you're just getting at there, is so Lawton, so Mindform curates like a certain group of human beings, right? And these people are, like, I would say the principal thing that's going on within Mindform is the self-actualization part, right? Like where people are coming in as individuals. They're not bringing their spouses, they're not bringing their teams, right? Like they're coming in as individuals to get better themselves, right? Like to get better at being themselves, become who you are, right? And designing the mind, learning how to be how to optimize, how to be the optimal version of themselves. But I think, and I think that's a very, very key cog in the overall process of where I think you're going now with this next question, which is, because it's not like you go to college and then you go to work, like you're not going to go to Mindform and then come out and then live your life, right? Like you're going to Mindform at the same time you're living your life.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
we just keep iterating on trying to become better ourselves, and then going and displaying a betterment in the world. And then and in doing that, try to help other people become the best versions of themselves. And so I just wanted to kind of also be clear about that, because I do think, I mean, for me personally, I think Mindform has played a very, very key and valuable role in that process. Me expanding my worldview and getting a better, self mastery, whatever you want to call it, and then going out, and the kids that I coach in basketball, or that I, tutor in math. Right now, I'm mentoring a OSU biological and ecological engineering student. Every one of those interactions that we have outside of Mindform, like what we're learning in Mindform, adds that value and potency and stuff to that. Does that answer your question, or
Yeah,
does
a
that
little
fall
bit. I
short
think
of?
one thing it speaks to is that, space and systems that really foster and encourage and pathways for individuals to focus on their own growth and their own development seem a really necessary component of a larger system, which, in order to create a larger system which fits that description, right, that ideal of the system where everyone's dedicated to everyone's flourishing. And definitely a part of flourishing is the capacity to knuckle in and just work on yourself, and to have systems that support that encourage that is necessary. So you can say that it's a necessary but perhaps not sufficient, that sort of self-improvement focus component of a community where everyone's dedicated to each individual's flourishing. Yeah, would you agree?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, my mind is, you got my mind kind of spinning now on
Same.
a lot of different thoughts. So I don't know that yeah, you don't have my full attention on grasping what you're saying, to be honest. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, I want to shift it just a little bit, and ask, what are some other core attributes that you see as essential for, whether it's that specific ideal of everyone being invested in each individual's flourishing, or whether it's just like effective regenerative systems in general. Like, what are some like core attributes or principles that you think repeat across that? Something that comes up for me that we've been talking about is, like a strong sense of connection between individuals, a capacity to connect effectively with each other, and a desire to connect effectively with each other. I think also, individuals having certain skills and capacities around growth and learning is really important. But yeah, what do you have? I imagine over time you've sort of accrued a bit of a list, right, of principles and attributes that you think are important for a strong culture.
yeah, so let me kind of ground this in a real world example that this is going to go back to where I was talking about the experiment that I'm crafting with this fellow that's
Right.
in the realm of, I guess, the realm, how you would describe it, like computational democracy. Okay, and this is where we both understand that the purest, most awesome form of democracy, you go into a community, right, that needs to change how it's living, right, and let's just say this example that I'm going to talk about is a small watershed that falls across the state border of Oregon and Washington. I've lived there for 20 years. I don't live there now, but I lived there for 2 decades, and I still have worked there most of my professional life. And so I'm really pretty deeply vested in understanding that ecosystem, but I'm also just like, immersed in the issues that community is facing. And what I've seen happen over the years is, the core problems persist because the community isn't equipped to do what it is we're talking about, right? Like it isn't equipped to, as a community of 60,000 people, they don't know how to, either through pure democracy or representational democracy or whatever tools we have, they don't know how to group problem solve, right?
Right.
And so so let me apply it. That's the conceptual model I'm thinking of when I answer your question, right? It's a real world example, but it's that scale, right? And some of the things that I see when they're present are very, very effective and helpful, and when they're absent are very, deleterious. Is, I mean, it's kind of like the DEI stuff generally, right? Like, you need a diversity of viewpoints.
Mm-hmm.
You need, like, anyone that cares needs to know how they can care, right? Like, they need, which is, I think, inclusion, right? Like, they need a way to be connected to the
Yeah.
problem solving effort, and particularly
Participation, maybe. Yeah.
if their life and livelihood is to be affected by whatever the solution that comes out of the planning and solution implementation process, they definitely need to have a portal into it. Now, one thing that, like, our civilization for 170 years has been, well, there's too many of us, and so let's vote on elected officials, and they'll be our representatives to this, right? Like you personally won't represent yourself, but someone else will represent you. And I think, again, I'm not a sociologist or whatever, like social scientist, so I don't know all this stuff officially, but like what I would call that is representational democracy, right?
Yeah.
Which is great as long as the person who represents you truly represents you, right? Where it starts to not be so
Not
great
so
is
common.
where,
Yeah.
like, you vote for this guy, but your vote didn't win. It's this person instead that got voted. So, like, you got to vote. It was democratic, but your vote didn't prevail, and so your representative doesn't really represent you. And then like, let me just jump to the, like, where we currently are today. Like, the planning occurs with a bunch of combined elected officials and handpicked representatives who also don't represent me. Well, then when the plan comes out, I don't see myself in the plan. Like, what I consider my number one problem isn't in the plan. It's not called out and solved by the plan. Well, then I'm not going to be a great big fan of the plan, right? And so it's kind of like we need, and this is where the computational democracy, the optimism or whatever, right? For computational democracy is there a way that we can harness the power? And I'm not necessarily going to AI here, although I think AI someday down the road has a role to play. But like, at a minimum, this idea, that we all can be connected through this, this guy plus Wi-Fi plus the internet plus apps, right? There's a connecting linkage there that, if properly designed and deployed, I might not be able to get into every meeting at the community college, for 8 months to represent myself on all these issues. But if there's a way that you could effectively tell me what's the essence of what's going on, and then give me a chance to say, oh, I agree with that, or no, I think you're missing the point. This is where the power of technology could assimilate a whole bunch of that, right? Now, there's a right way or a effective way and an ineffective way to do that. And some of what we've seen in the early ages of using the web for this is like a comment box. Here, everybody give, a suggestion box or something, right? Everybody throw your 2 cents in there. Well, all the input comes in like not contextualized. And so people are just saying whatever they want to say. There's no rhyme or reason to the comments or whatever, right? Like, so that isn't, I mean, you've gotten everybody engaged or involved if you do that, but that there's not a coherence, right? Like, that information they're sending in isn't truly informing the process, because it's like it hasn't been given like an actual context, right?
Yeah. Can I cut in here?
Well, let me just say one more thing, and then I'll let you take over. So, like, what Sam and I are talking about is it's a poll that the way it's constructed is in the form of statements that like the community is sending to itself. These statements, like, one core problem is that stream temperatures at this location are between, from June to October are 4 degrees higher than they should be for optimal biological health, let's just say, right? And then there's no obstacle to every single member of the community receiving that message and saying, I agree with that, I disagree with that, or something, right? Not comment on this, but just simply, and then you get data back that tells you, like, we're completely split on this. Half the people in this population agree with this, and half that don't. Well, then that's a really clear signal. The community doesn't know, like, the information that would answer that question isn't flowing to all the members of the community. Then that's the problem, right? Like, it's not, well, they're against everything, therefore, and I'm trying to, like, I mean, we're given 5 minutes to this concept, to something that I could probably talk to you.
It's very hard to
about.
articulate. Yeah. I think, but Yeah, I mean, what I think you're talking about particular expressions of this, or trying to paint pictures of particular examples of this. But I mean, I agree, and I think most would, that you look at our democratic systems or our management systems, or our various kind of social infrastructures that we have, that they acknowledge the importance of how do we get people with various views, various abilities, various levels of interest to have, how do we create a system whereby that all comes together, and then something somewhat constructive or relevant or useful comes out of that. And but the systems we have at large they're really low resolution in terms of how they model people's views, and they're really inefficient in terms of how they break down and transmit that data. Right? There's a lack of acknowledgement of a variety of nuances. I think there's a lack of acknowledgement of how does information not only spread, but how is it like effectively absorbed, right? Like a place like social media or public consultations where everyone just comes up and has their spiel on the mic. Like, it acknowledges that everything needs to be heard, but it doesn't appreciate just the real dynamic of, we don't have enough, like, we need help to hear an idea and integrate or understand it in our terms. Like, if someone else expresses it, or I need help to express my idea in a way that is going to be perceived by other people, or that there's some structure for them to receive that and integrate that. Because otherwise, if there's not a structure in place, if you're building, I mean, you think of, you see, I'm sure a lot of people do this, I certainly do, I quite enjoy watching, whether it's like live in my own country or sometimes from other parts of the world, including the US. I like watching footage of political engagement, like whether that's the seating room of politicians, or whether it's a space where members of the public are able to come up and share their piece. Um, and you just observe that people will be passionately sharing their take on the issue, but the message is just not getting across. And not only are the politicians on the other side, or the representatives, not really hearing or acknowledging or respecting what's being said by their opponent or by this member of the public, but they have no way of doing anything with what they're hearing. They don't. There's no tool for them of how to integrate that, and I wouldn't even know where to start with developing that. But things like this do seem really essential. It does seem like something you could code into, or I'm using the wrong term, I'm sure, but something you could train AI to, that you could, because that's what AI does, right? It's trained on a large data set, and it's able to not just by mushing it together, but somewhat intelligently create something cohesive that incorporates a diversity of knowledge. And you could create there could be a variety of ways that the AI could do that I wouldn't even know how to approach. But that isn't to understate, I think, the value of pure democracy. I mean, I remember reading about it in the book Humankind by Rutger Bregman, and it's just a testimony to, hey, if you actually allow people to rule themselves, they're not inherently going to screw it up. So it's kind of a pro-democracy book, and it talks about towns, or cities in some part of sort of middle or South America, like as in the continent, and not the country, and where like 50% of the budget is decided not by the representatives, not by the selected, the handpicked by the representative experts, but just by the population. They come to community meetings, anyone who wants to come along, and it's basically it's almost a consensus model where people come in and everyone has their piece, and they sit in a room, and they have to do it over days or whatever to come up with how are we going to spend our budget in our city. And it's been a massive improvement. I think part of what's needed is just the time and the bandwidth to actually listen to each other, I'd say. Yeah. It is 4 minutes past the hour. I think this might be a time to wrap up. We touched the surface of a lot of different things, and I wish I could have dug a little bit more personally into you and what makes you tick. But a lot of these ideas, I just couldn't help being curious about them. So that's the way we went. But thank you for coming on, John, and thanks for your expertise. It was really interesting, just hearing about how, because I find these ideas entertaining, effective systems, yada yada. But hearing someone who has these particular examples, who has decades of experience, trying to, just clearing that out in real communities where these dynamics are at play, real collectives where these dynamics are at play. It was really interesting hearing your takes, and especially understanding, the actual specific structures that are needed. Structures, how do we structure democracy? How do we structure business systems? How do we transfer information? And that is a very, very, very complex question that you could probably give 10 hours to with 10 experts and barely get there. But yeah, thanks, John. And I'll ask you one last question: is what's sort of a key principle or tool or system that you would like to leave me with, or the listeners, or those in the chat, in relation to what we've been talking about?
Yeah. So before the session, you sent me a email with a list of about a dozen questions. They're all really good questions. The one that I wish you'd have asked that we didn't get to, you said, what's an argument everyone seems to be having where you have a different opinion to both sides? And so that's how I want to answer this question you've asked. So coming out of election season in the U.S., and I assume that we're not the only ones in election season around the world, but we're in the U.S. we're deeply immersed in this notion of whether the Republicans or Democrats, are quote unquote right, and more specifically, the argument they seem to be having is that 51% is winning, and I just have a very different view than that. And on my poetry, my Substack poetry, I've written several poems inspired by this feeling differently about this. Is I've been forwarding the notion of a Pareto poll. And if the Pareto principle is the 80-20 rule, but I've been just putting out there into the universe, the idea that, like, what if all of our elected officials organize themselves around designing and building platforms that are designed to garner 80% support instead of 51% support. And I think so straight out of the gate, the chat, if anyone cares, the chat's going to go off and saying, like, I'm in la la land or whatever, right? Because that just isn't realistic. But it's like, it's only not realistic because we don't have leadership that thinks it's realistic, right?
Yeah,
it's
totally
like we're one decision or one mindset or worldview away from a group of people getting elected, whether they're red, blue, a third party, whatever, but intelligent, articulate people that know how to think critically, stepping forward and saying, okay, we're not going to play this 51-49 game anymore because it's not winning. It's like 51% isn't winning. We need to have our standard be 80% to declare a winner. And so we have to design platforms that work for, and I think in doing that, we'd be moving closer to this idea of all members flourishing, right? Yeah. Because I think 51-49 is built on the precept that it's something completely different than all members flourishing.
Oh, I mean, it's. I think it fails to acknowledge that, our flourishing is interdependent, and so, people's flourishing occurs individually. So, as long as more than half, is getting their flourishing, then that's a majority. But the reality is, of course, if 49% of the population is not getting their needs met, then the whole population is seriously negatively impacted by that. But I think a lot of people have said, I'm not going to go out and say this myself, but that the West, the modern world, and the US as a prime example, has this, individualist view of the world that does have a kind of a unique capacity to ignore that reality, that that our lives are that deeply interconnected. That's what that's the sort of, the West has an individualist worldview line that you hear around.
I think I'd encourage you to be careful though with that. The West has.
Totally.
Because it's
a line.
That makes it sound like that's just like a static thing, right?
Right.
Has displayed, right? Like, but we're in a transition period, and like you just said today on Mindform with the Horizon 3 The future is already here. It's just not equally distributed. Like all the things we talked about today, that every piece of that sounded pie in the sky, it's just an H3 horizon.
Oh, right. It's
Those
absolutely
ideas
there. I mean, there are
they're
individuals who
already in
believe in
play. It's
that,
already
who have those
happening.
agreements. Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
it's already happening. It just isn't happening at the it's not, we're not
No, I
at the
do
center
love
of
that
mass
idea.
curve on it. We're at the front end of some of these things, but they're already emerging. They're already happening. And so the question is really, how can we accelerate the things that make it better and decelerate the things that make it worse, right? And transition from one to the other, which is what this month's book has been all about. For me, at the core, is like we are transitioning. And back to I just want to comment real quickly on your Western point of view, rugged individualism. 100% agree. I was 100% raised on that mindset my entire life, or my entire developmental part of my life. But again, that's a period that is coming to an end. Like that was an exploratory period. We had never been to the moon before, and so
it's
in
a
the
period
70s,
that has
we go to the moon. We
that
had not been. We landed on the
yeah.
East Coast in the United States, and we
Oh yeah. I
propagated
mean,
our
there's a
way
whole
over to the West Coast.
it's
But
wild.
we're relatively
Very
new
diverse history. Yeah.
to the we're at the end of the geographical exploration, right? And so like we needed all that rugged individualism to get all the exploring done. Well, now we got to explore a whole different realm.
Living together, making it work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
I
Yeah.
would just
So
put a caveat on. You said it's coming to an end. Well, I would say that there are shifts happening now that are not evenly distributed, that have the option, if given power, if given intention, to,
yeah,
when looked back
totally
on in the
fair.
future, be seen as the beginning of the end, or the beginning of a transformation. But it is about what we give our focus to. But I remember engaging with this interesting idea, and I think someone talked about it on the podcast as well, of like alternate universes, right? And there's a few people in the sort of new age movement that basically say that the universe there's all these alternate universes, and you can like jump between them, and the universe that you perceive, the beliefs that you hold about the world, define what universe you're in, and then that sets the course for the reality and for the future and for everything as it is from now. And I think this idea of it's just not evenly distributed really speaks to that, is that we see our simple kind of wrapping up picture of the whole world, and we see the past of the world, and then we say, okay, this is the world, this is what it's like, and then we think about, oh, this is maybe what the world as a whole could be like in the future. But the reality is there's an insane, immeasurable diversity, not only of ways that people are operating now, but also of ideals that people have, of beliefs that people have that they're hiding within them, of perspectives that people operate on. And it's about the future, or even the reality as it is now, can be absolutely transformed just by where are we putting our focus, right? What, how are we interpreting this diversity? You look at, because I mean, say for the example of like more representative democracy, not more representative, but like better democratic systems, computational democracy, I think was the phrasing you used. There's so many people in the world today who are interested in that, who believe in that. There's so many movements happening now that could be the beginning of the creation of that. There are places and moments in the world when that's actively at play. And instead of understanding that's not the world now, it could be the world in the future, how about just giving our attention and our focus and our perception to the reality of it as it is now? Does that make sense? Like, that to me seems like a really important response to that truth of the future's already here. Like, there's this battling with now to create the future approach, and then there's this looking into the now with perceptiveness, looking into the now differently, and understanding what movements that are alive now how could they be understood, how could they be empowered, how could they unfold to the future. I thought, okay. I think, yeah, let's wrap up. Let's wrap up because I actually have a call at 2 with these guys about, I think Brandy's coming, about Notion,
Cool.
using systems in Notion. You can join if you want. But yeah, thanks for coming and thanks for your insights. And we can, well, I'm sure we will, because this is the topic of our month, continue this conversation in Mindform. Yeah, I really appreciate you being here, John, and let's catch up again soon as well.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers, John. All right, have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Mindform podcast. I'm Ryan A. Bush, founder and author of Designing the Mind and creator of Mindform. Mindform is an exclusive community and training platform for sculpting your psychological software. Members get access to a group of like-minded psychotechs, including all of our guests on this podcast, gamified growth tools, events and retreats, and a collection of transformative programs for mental health and self-mastery. You can learn more and apply to join at mindform.io/podcast. I hope to see you inside.